Today I'm going to be showing you a step-by-step process on how to make this cabochon gemstone, which is an aquamarine, into a sterling silver statement ring with a mountain sunrise on the side. Let's go. First, I'm going to start with drawing the outer perimeter. I'm going to be using this shank, which I've pre-cut. It's 20 gauge sterling silver. I'm going to set it, and when it's in ring form, it'll lay against this side, just like that. This doesn't have to be exact. This is a rough estimate, so we have a plan. And that's generally the shape we're going for with the overall ring. This is a rough sketch of what our mountain range will look like, the placement that it'll be in. We're going to do it by layering silver with stamps set into it. I have here a small coil of a flat bezel wire. We're going to wrap this around the stone, and it'll be what holds the stone in place when we're finished. It's fairly soft and easily malleable, that way we can get the general shape that we need without too much work. I'm going to mark it here, and I'm going to use shears to cut it. I prefer to use shears on small cuts like this over using a saw, because I can be very exact and save a lot of time. Here I'm going to weigh the stone. It's 1.6 grams. .06 ounces. And that's 8 carats. So we have an 8 carat of an aquamarine gemstone. I'm going to use a pair of flatters to keep the metal at the same angle. That way it bonds a lot better and cleaner. This is a 26 gauge sheet of sterling silver. This will be our backing, which goes behind the stone, holding it in place and protecting it from damage. We'll simply sketch it, rough estimate, and as long as I cut outside of that perimeter, it'll be ready for the stone. I'm using shears here. A lot of this is to save time. A saw blade works wonders, but takes quite a bit longer. This 24 gauge plate of sterling silver, I'm going to set the stamps with this That extra dimension will add quality. Here's the example of the stamp. That's a mountain range when it's pressed in the metal. Here's our sun. I have a cast iron anvil, and as you can see, I've done my maker's mark and a sterling silver stamp on the back of this. I use a rawhide mallet for cleaning and straightening pieces without damaging or marring them. Now we're going to pre-flatten, make sure all of this is clean and ready to use. I'm going to take this back plate and I'm going to flatten it as well. That way it's ready to go underneath the bezel. Now we're going to mark with our sunrise stamp. It's a fairly simple one. We'll put it directly on the shank of the ring. Making sure that it's placed where it will rise above where the stamp on the next surface will be. We're doing it on both sides so it's mirrored on each side of the stone. And there it is. It's a nice press. Now we take the 24 gauge sheet. We've got the rawhide mallet. Make sure it's nice and flat. An even surface will receive the stamp so much better. When you're marking a more detailed image, you're going to want to make sure that you get a flat, even surface, one solid strike. That keeps it from having lines spilling over each other from having to strike more than once, which could ruin the whole image. I'm going to mark 2 here because we're going to have one on both sides of the ring. And then we'll go and we'll cut these out. Here they are cut out. I'm going to take the shears. I'm going to clean up the edges a little bit. The better I can remove the excess, the nicer this finished product will look. Now we're ready for filing. I've used a simple diamond grit file and I've cleaned into the edge. Now we're going to set it on our shank here. It's going to rest just about here, bonded to the sterling. So we'll have 2 layers of sterling silver and the sun beneath. Against the bezel, that's roughly what the ring will look like. I'm using an oxyacetylene torch. I'm only using the acetylene. I don't need the oxygen. This is a flux. It'll allow the softer silver to run well and bond the 2 metals. I've got a hard sterling solder. I can set the solder directly on the solder board, and as long as it is touching the flux, it will pull into the seam. And there we go. Those two are bonded. Now I'm going to take graphite from a pencil. If I mark it into all of the lines and seams, it's going to make it so that when I solder this to the main piece and those two pieces are bonded, none of my liquefied silver will flow into the graphite, protecting the image. That will also work on the shank. So we want to fill all of our marks. Anytime you're using a lot of solder or you're doing solder near any marks, you want to make sure you do this. And I'm going to do half of the suns. The top half that will be showing. The bottom half I do want to bond, so it's a good clean fit. Now we take our flux. We want to make sure the flux is touching every surface that we want to bond. What the flux is going to do is it's going to put the metal at a critical temperature where it will begin to liquefy before anything else does. This is a medium flux and a medium solder. The medium solder will melt at about 50 degrees cooler. This is Fahrenheit, than the silver around it, allowing it to bond a lot faster. I flatten these with a small hammer. They'll go between the plate and the stamp. It's worth taking your time to line everything up properly here. Having everything bond well and in the right position is going to save you a lot of headache, so you don't have to fix it afterwards. Fixing it is a lot harder than just doing it the right way to begin with. Now, as we heat this, the bottom shank is a lot more sterling than those that I'm setting on top. This means that we need the heat to spread evenly before we commit to melting. Otherwise, the smaller piece could potentially heat and melt without being able to bond to the bottom, which could ruin and make us have to start everything over. And everything reached a critical temperature evenly. The liquefied silver flowed together. And you can see here it's bonded well. Now we have it resting in a pickle. This is going to eat away at any fire scale, and any left after this will easily be removable with a paper towel. Set it in water, that way the acid stops burning. Now we're going to solder the back plate. This will bond to the bezel. That way the ring has the solid stone setting. This is going to be the same process that we did for the shank. The main difference being we need to make sure that the liquefied silver will flow completely around the base of the bezel. You don't want any openings or gaps where material, debris, or liquids over time can get beneath the ring stone and cause damage. The amount I'm using here is an estimated amount. I want to make sure I have enough to flow evenly beneath all of it, but I don't want to have too much where it creates a bubble or other problems like a mound of silver underneath the stone. When the metal liquefies, it'll naturally want to follow gravity, but it will also want to flow into gaps and seams and fill them in. We're using that to our advantage here, so we just set these aside along the edge and it'll flow in really clean. The key to setting a good bezel well as you solder is to make sure the base plate beneath is receiving the same amount of heat as the bezel. If I was to fire directly on top of it, right in the middle, the bezel would melt before all of the solder ran and before all of the silver bonded. And you could see there, once it hit critical temperature, it all melted into place immediately and flowed right into the seam. There's a small bubble of silver on the bottom left there, but it is nothing to worry about. Here we have the shank, already out of the pickle and cleaned up. We're going to cut the trim around the edge, all of this excess. I often favor using shears in these situations. This is because it saves me a lot of time. Where a jeweler's saw does a very clean cut, I can get close to exact here and clean it up with a little bit of sanding. I'm being careful to take my time so I can cut evenly along the very edge of the bezel, which will save me a lot of time sanding later. And I can use my offcuts for little embellishments on future pieces. Here's the rough shape of what it's going to look like. You can see it matches our drawing pretty similarly. Now we're going to clean up the whole piece. I have a Dremel tool here where I've got a small sanding disc. The more I get close to the exact shape I want preemptively here, the more I'm going to save time later when the ring is actually formed into a ring. I'm going to soften some of the sharper edges and clean off some of the marring and marks. That way when I do the final polish, I won't have any deep scratches left in the middle. Slightly rounding the edges so it's a more comfortable fit. You definitely have to trust the process here. The more I prep these pieces before they're together, the more the final product is going to be a comfortable, clean fit. I'm flattening and removing some of the excess silver that flowed into that bezel. That way it looks a lot cleaner. And then I'll go around the edge and begin to clean it up so it's one solid surface, and I'll break the edge by sanding it so it's not perfectly flat of an angle. Rounding the angle slightly will also contribute to the comfort of the ring. Now we're almost ready for these to cleanly go together. I need to slightly curve the shank so it can bond to the bottom of the bezel cup well. I'll use a file and I'll clean it up with the Dremel tool afterwards. Now we've got it just about shaped where the molten metal can flow well. Finish cleaning up a little bit here. And we'll be able to take this to the mandrel, get it exactly the shape we need to bond it to the bezel cup. Then it will really start to look like a ring and it'll be a lot better. I'm using a ring mandrel here with a flat face. It'll give me an estimate of the size of the bezel cup and the stone where it will set. And I can shape accordingly. Now I'll take the rawhide mallet. I'm going to clean it up so it's nice and round. If it's clean, round, and it's straight and parallel with itself, when it's bonded as a full ring, it will fit a lot better, be a lot more comfortable, and look a lot cleaner. That's how it will sit. I'll do a little bit of adjusting and we'll be ready to bond it. Once again, I'm using graphite. Every single inch of this that I do not want silver to flow into, I need to put graphite over. If I was this late into the ring and ruined the entire image, I'd have to start the entire ring over. This will also keep it so that when I flow the silver into itself, it won't pass that line, and more silver will stay where it needs to bond the bezel cup to the shank. Now we're using an easier solder. This means that the sterling inside of this is a more pure silver, which will melt even easier, allowing it to flow and bond very well. I want to move the torch constantly, evenly heating the entire surface. Now it begins to melt. It flows into the seams. It goes up the band just a slight amount. Having the ring upside down, it'll lay across the cup and become one bonded element. And there we go. Now we're ready for the pickle. The pickle I have in a small crock pot. Keeping it warm will make it activate stronger and faster. It's a hydrochloric acid made with vinegar and salt. Now I put it in water to deactivate these acids, and we'll dry it off, see how it looks. And here we go. Now we're ready to start doing the final cleanup. Before the final cleanup, we're going to use liver of sulfur, which is going to darken the deep lines and give a lot of depth to the piece by the finish. I'm going to do a time lapse here so you can see how the liver of sulfur activates over time on the silver. It'll cause a patina to form and the metal to darken. This is roughly 2 hours. And there we go. After 2 hours of darkening, you can see the patina took very well. Let's go clean it up. This is a 400 grit bristle disc. It is abrasive enough to move and shape the metal, but it's a high enough polish that it's going to do more polishing than removing. So I can soften edges, clean up any scratches or dings, and make everything start to look really nice before the final polishes. In the earlier grits, you really want to take your time, hitting every little nook and cranny. Now we're moving up to a 600 grit bristle disc. This is the last abrasive disc that can actually remove any sort of material. It'll soften the edges a little bit more, but it's going to 90% polish. We'll start getting a real shine out of the sterling. And you can see from our patina earlier, the mountain range has a bit of depth, which looks really nice. As you can see here, it cleaned up very well. Now we're on to the 1000 grit bristle disc. This is a pure polish. It's not going to remove any material outside of just enough to be polishing. And this is getting into the final stages of the polish. We only have one set of discs after this. I'm using a multi-wheel of 3 bristle discs stacked. These are 2000 grit. This is going to be a final polish before I tumble the piece. The luster will be really nice. You could finish here and call the piece polished and done, but running it in the tumbler is going to work hard in the metal, making it more durable and last a lot longer for future use. This is a piece that you could have for a lifetime, and if you properly take care of it, it could be a family heirloom. There you go. Now we're going to clean it up. Some of that finer powder of silver, pulling it off, getting it ready. And now we're ready to throw it in the tumbler. I'm using a stainless steel birdshot in a suspended dust of silver medium. It's just water, silver dust, and the birdshot. I put a little drip of dish soap in it. I use Dawn dish soap. It acts as a lubricating medium, making it so that the sterling silver isn't capable of marring or scratching the silver surfaces. This will tumble for anywhere from 2 to 12 hours, depending on how hard and how worked you want the surface of the metal and how cleanly you want the polish. 2 minimum, it'll make it look really nice and it'll work hard in it so it's a durable piece. 12 is for if you want that piece to be absolutely perfect and spotless. You can already see how much of a shine the ring has. Shows the depth properly. You can see that with sunrise just fine. The inside of the cup is clean, ready for the stone. Everything is smooth, polished, and comfortable. Now we're ready to set the stone. You can set stones with a stainless steel or brass stone setting tool. I also have this plexi tool, which does not mar the surface or scratch it. So I use the stainless or brass as needed. But when I have a larger bezel like this, it's a lot easier to work it with the softer surface that won't damage it. People have asked me What makes the bezels on my pieces so clean and keeps them from being wavy or having gaps? It's simply a matter of taking the time to work around the piece over and over again until every bit of it is set. If I stopped now, as you can see, it would work fine, but you have on the bottom left, bottom right, and the top left, small gaps. Those would stay permanently if you don't take the time to slowly work around the stone and even the silver over the surface. To have a very nice professional finish, it is worth taking the time to do this. It's starting to look really good. We only have a little bit more to close up. We just keep working the silver around and around, and it closes it in more and more. The key things we're looking for here is to have it so the stone does not move, wiggle, shake, or rattle at all. And have it so that the bezel is cleanly set, and when we wipe it off, the polish is stayed. If there were any scratches or mars after this point, we'd have to polish them out again. And depending on the stone type and the hardness, you could damage the cabochon while doing this.